Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Turning Point. Today, our guest is Asante Haughton. He is a mental health advocate who focuses on the intersections of race and mental health. His incredible work has been recognized right around the world. Among just some of his accolades, he has done 2 TED Talks, and he was also named one of the top 150 difference makers in Canadian mental health. Thank you so much for being here today, Asante.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm very excited to get to your Turning Point. But before we get there, I actually just wanted to ask how you're doing. You spoke out about quite a harrowing experience that you had with COVID-19 last April, so April 2020. How are you feeling now?
I'm mostly okay, I would say. One of the big things that I experienced with COVID was just extreme fatigue. And it took a long time for me to get my energy back. So, I definitely have my energy back. Probably the lingering symptom I have is I now have, high blood pressure, which impacts me in a lot of different ways. And I've definitely had to change my lifestyle for the positive, really. It's made me do a lot more positive things in terms of lifestyle. But I stopped drinking. I'm exercising more. I'm eating better, far less junk food, less salt, things of that nature, a lot more veggies and fruit. But it's been difficult to make those changes. Those people who are like skinny no matter what they eat. Like I've been one of those people for most of my life, so I just ate like not as well as I should have probably in the last several years. But now I got to make those changes, and I'm actually feeling a lot better for it. So it hasn't had too much of a negative impact on my life. But from time to time, the blood pressure inexplicably goes up, and I'll get vertigo, and I'll have challenges with things like balance. But I would say 29 days out of 30, I'm good.
It's, these lingering effects. I know we've been hearing a little bit more about them in the media here and there, but to hear that almost a year later you're still experiencing some of these lingering effects. I'm glad you're mostly better, but it's just kind of a testament to the fact that we still don't know so much about this illness.
Yeah, and with that, a thing that's been frustrating for me is when you see memes or people on TV, and I live downtown. Every so often we get the anti-masker protests and things of that nature, and people are treating this thing like, oh, most people survive, so whatever if I catch it. And let me tell you, it's not like that. I grew up an athlete. I've been in, I've never really let myself get in terrible shape at any point during my life. I've been in good shape most of my life, and I'm still, pretty young. I'm under 40, so for me, it's and I caught it, and it knocked me over. I was sick for about a month, and then it probably took about 2.5, 3 months after that before I started to feel close to normal again. And I think people really are underestimating how prevalent this disease is. I know probably 30, 40 people who have caught it. And maybe that's because this disease is also more prevalent in amongst racial minorities in our city. So, and the large majority of people I know are racial minorities. So that might be a factor as well. But it's out there. It's serious. From a lot of people I know who have got it, they said it's the worst thing that they've ever gone through in terms of health. And these are people sometimes in their 20s, young. And, it's just a really challenging thing. And, it can be scary. For me, there's a point where I thought I was going to die, and I bounced back, as much as you can say I bounced back. So I'm doing all right now, but it's definitely a thing to take seriously.
Yeah, that's such an important reminder, and to hear it from someone who has experienced it firsthand. I'm so glad that you are feeling better. But I think this reminder of how seriously we need to take this situation is really important. So I'm happy you're doing better. But
Thank you.
thank you for that reminder. I when we had our first call, I have read so much about your work and your career, and I was very interested to know what you would say would be your biggest turning point. And of course, there have been so many. I think we both
Several.
agreed on that in our call. I know you've shared quite a few of them in your speaking engagements as well. But you actually have one that you haven't talked about publicly that we're going to talk about today. This happened when you were 22 years old, and it was when you found out you were going to be a father. So tell
Yes.
me about that time.
Oh man, it was wild. It was a whirlwind. It's I think what was really challenging for me about that time was, around age 20, 21, I started to figure out some aspects of my life in a positive way. And it started to really feel like I was turning the corner and I was building some momentum for myself. And then, unexpected pregnancy. And, it was really challenging because, the assumption is when this happens with young people, it's like, oh, you must have been being super careless and that kind of thing. And that's not the truth. We actually were using birth control and things of that nature, a variety of different forms of birth control. And, um, you know, uh, things happened. It didn't work. It failed. And, here we are. And all of a sudden we're pregnant, right? So I'm, halfway through my university career at this point. I generated a big social group for probably the first time in many, many years. And, I was kind of living it up. I was in the club. I was working at a club. I was being a young person, right? It was just, living life as most young people do. And then, we learned about the pregnancy, and there were just drastic changes in my life immediately.
Yeah, so tell me more about that. How did this impact the relationships you had with your friends and your family at this time?
I would say it had a huge impact because, whether people said it or not, and many people did say it, there was a lot of disappointment that this had happened to me. People treated it like almost like I had gotten a contagious disease, and everyone just slowly started to disappear out of my life. It was just that was not the response I expected. I mean, my mom was upset, and I expected that, right? But in terms of friends and stuff like that, I mean, it just seemed like everyone just started to disappear, and people who I would hang out with all the time, several times a week. I mean, I just stopped seeing them, and they stopped texting, they stopped calling, and all of a sudden it was like I went from having a big group or several different groups that I would hang out with to maybe three or four people um, overall. And even in my family, there were challenges there. A lot of judgments made about me, and between family and friends, that there were folks who were like, okay, this guy's essentially ruined his life, and people felt it was inevitable I was going to drop out of school. And those things were really hard. And I mean, even other residual factors like my dating life, because, one of the fallouts of being pregnant that young was, me and, my kid's mother, we didn't make it, so to speak. We actually broke up pretty recently after we found out about the pregnancy. And anyways, I mean, you're a young person, you want to get out there, you want to date, you want to do that kind of thing. But like nobody was trying to date me at that point. So it was even for like several years afterward. It was really tough and it was really challenging. So there were a huge amount of impacts in my social life and my family life.
And this would have been a time when you really needed those relationships. I'm sure, like you're 22, you're young, you're in school. This pregnancy is unexpected, and I'm sure that you would have really benefited from having the support of your friends and family. So it must have been really, aside from the situation being challenging in its own right, just having the added layer of this stress that was caused by losing these other relationships must have been really, really hard. So how did you cope with that?
At first I wouldn't say I did cope with it. Probably the biggest thing that helped me was, I'm a writer. Um, and, at that point in time, I was making a lot of music. So that was probably the biggest thing for me was I just wrote everything down. There were a lot of times where I probably should have been studying, but I was writing instead just because I couldn't study. I just had so much emotion that got in the way of my concentration. So I had to do something with that before I could even look at a textbook. So I did a lot of writing. And I would also say, despite the fact that I lost a lot of my support systems, my best friends and my oldest brother, they really held me down during that time, and were constantly checking up on me, constantly making sure I was okay, uh, constantly just trying to encourage me to stay strong and stay on the path that I was already on, and that was really helpful because with the way I was being treated by so many people in my life at that time, it took a tremendous hit on my self esteem, and I started to feel ashamed of being in the position that I was in. And it wasn't, it wasn't easy to be dealing with all that stuff. At 20, 21, 22, whatever it was, whatever age I was at that time, um, a tremendous amount of shame. And I feel like the shame was something that I wasn't ashamed at the moment we found out about the pregnancy. Like at that time, I was kind of like, well, things happen. Let's figure it out and let's move forward with life. Where the shame really came from was how everybody around me responded. And people start to look at you with pity in their eyes, and they ask questions like, some of the friends who eventually disappeared, they would ask questions like, they would ask you kind of, how you're doing, how's the pregnancy going, but you could just tell that something was different. With the way they asked the question, it was almost like there was judgment there, or that, all of a sudden that was the only part of me that they saw. It wasn't even like we could chill anymore and just, be like we were before. Like that became like the image of me, and it wasn't just like, oh, this guy is he's young and he's having a kid. It was in a lot of ways, I represented a stereotype that people have in their heads about young black men, right? So if this young black guy was having a kid at age 22, that must mean a lot of different things about him. He's irresponsible. He's uneducated. He's not going anywhere with his life. All these things are just stereotypes, by the way. There's a lot of people, black or otherwise, who have kids young, and they reach the stars, right? But this is kind of the perception that I was feeling from everybody. I'm very intuitive, like I'm extremely intuitive when it comes to people and energy and that kind of thing. And I was just feeling this everywhere from everybody. So I started to internalize the shame that was being thrown upon me, and that was really challenging. But having the few supports that I had around, and the pen and the paper, those things really did help.
Yeah, thankfully you had, some of those strong relationships, and it sounds like it really did show you kind of who your true friends and allies were. But yeah, losing people who are close to you, who you spend a lot of time with, especially, when you really need their support. I mean, and as a young person, when your social structures are really what makes, what makes everyone tick at that age. I think it's great that you were able to kind of find some solace in writing. And also, spoiler alert, I mean, you proved all of those people and all of those stereotypes wrong. You were in school, as you mentioned, at the time in university, and you were doing quite well. I know you just said there, a lot of people said, oh, he's, you're probably going to drop out. You're probably not going to finish, or you're not going to go anywhere. But obviously that is the opposite of what happened to you.
Yeah.
So how, tell us though about the impact it had on your education, and how did you continue?
Yeah, I mean, the it had my grades dropped. Like, I'm not gonna front, like my grades didn't drop like they did. I went from being a guy who was cruising to a 3.8. Like, I mean, I was working hard enough to get that grade, but if I worked harder, I probably could have had the 4.0. But I was kind of, cruising to the 3.8, and all of a sudden, my grades just dropped an entire letter grade, so I finished with a 3.2, which still, is pretty good. It's not terrible, but
That's really good. I mean, I think for most people that's really good, let alone someone who is taking care of a baby and also also trying to continue through university, which is challenging on its own.
well, let me paint the picture for you. And again, I've never really spoken about this publicly, so I mean, I love the opportunity to talk about it now. So, like I was mentioning earlier, me and my child's mother, we broke up when she became pregnant because we just had some philosophical differences around how to manage our futures together while raising this baby. So, anyways, that happened, and then she kind of moved out of the city an hour away. And at that time, I didn't drive. I didn't even have a driver's license of any sort, like nothing, like zero, because city kid. Anyway, so now I had to. I mean, she lived an hour away driving, but taking transit, it was. Here's what would happen. I would, when I would go visit him on the weekends and stuff like that, I would hop on transit at, around 3 o'clock. Sorry, around 5 p.m. I'd arrive at the location around 7:30. Hop on transit to come back down, and I'd get home around 9:30, 10 o'clock. That was my Fridays, right? Then I'd have him for the weekend, and then I would hop on transit again um, around 11 a.m., 12 p.m. on Sunday, arrive at my destination 3, 4 o'clock, hop back on a transit and get home 8:30, 9 o'clock. So the journey, um, every time I went to pick him up, have him for the weekend, and then drop him off, that was about 14 hours in total. Like, every time. And at that point, it was either every week or every other week I was going to, I was picking him up. So I was doing that while working, my part-time job, while being in school full-time, and still trying to keep up having some level of social life and family life and, time for myself. My time management became impeccable those years. Um, uh, uh, and it was really tough because, there were times where, many times I was, studying on the bus or writing assignments on the bus, or that kind of thing. And, sometimes I couldn't do that because the bus was loud with other people, or, my own kid was crying on the bus. Um, and, but it was really challenging just to, that was kind of my lifestyle for several years, for the last 2.5 years of my education. But, you got to do what you got to do. And I was very, very determined to not drop out. I was very determined to finish because I knew I had to if I wanted to make anything for my life, which is essentially, providing opportunities for him as well.
I was going to ask you about that piece of it, that kind of change in perspective that came after your son was born. How did that affect, maybe some of the decisions that you made after that? And I know, aside from what you described there, this very big change in your lifestyle and your time. But how else did bringing this new life into the world change your perspective?
I mean, it completely changed my mentality I had toward life. Again, when you're in your early 20s, it's like go to school, party, and that's kind of it, right? And at that point in time, that's kind of what I was interested in, especially because in high school I didn't have like a huge social life in high school. So I'm like, I'm trying to make up for lost time now, right? So I was, in the club 3, 4 times a week, um, or the bar or something, and I wasn't necessarily super focused on my future. I knew I had to get good grades so that when I did when some image of my future did materialize, I'd have, the foundation to rely upon to move farther in my career. But I wouldn't say that I had like a path laid out for me or anything like that. So, you know, that's how it was. And then, you know, you find out about the pregnancy, and immediately I did a 180 and I started thinking, how am I going to support this young person, right? And, you know, the other piece of it too is, you know, I was kind of getting involved in some things that maybe I shouldn't have been involved in, with regard to, like, you know, I was doing a lot of like shoplifting and things of that nature. And, you know, I started dabbling in, you know, I mean, to put it in like clear terms, I mean, you know, I was, you know, moving narcotics a little bit, like not like on like a huge level, but, you know, I lived in a neighborhood where, you know, that was kind of a thing that some people did. And, you know, for me, I mean, people will say, oh, yeah, he was trying to floss. He was trying to, you know, flex and have all the gear and the clothes and all that. But part of it was I was just very poor. so, you know, I wanted to feel like I could afford the lifestyle of a young person. And for me, it meant sometimes, you know, shoplifting like minor items of clothing. I was never like like it's not like I was going just wild with it, but, you know, it was a little bit here and there. And same with the drugs. It was like a few times. It wasn't like I was making a career out of this. Like, it happened like, you know, a few times. And then, you know, for me, I started to look at that stuff, and I'm like, you know, I could never get caught up in this life, because what's going to happen to him if I do? Like, I started to think how embarrassing it would be and how much I would regret if I ended up with a criminal record of any kind, even if it was tiny, because of, you know, these sorts of behaviors or things that I was into, right? So I was like, I just dropped all that stuff immediately. I was never like a bad kid ever, really, you know, but, you know, there was a few months there where I was kind of, you know, doing that kind of stuff, but I dropped all of that immediately. I got my headset on straight, and I said, okay, let's really focus and get my life together, you know? And that's what I did from that point. And, you know, I'm here now, and I think I've been able to succeed in the ways that I wanted to succeed, because, you know, I made it. At that time, I said to myself that by the time he is 10 years old, I will need to be in a position where I can provide for him if anything bad were to happen. He's 12 years old. You know, at the time of recording this, he's actually turning 13 in like 2 days. So, literally 2 days actually. And so, you know, I was able to reach that goal of providing for myself and providing something for him. You know, it has not been easy. And, you know, another thing that I don't really talk about too often is, you know, is his mom actually passed away a few years ago. You know, maybe about 2.5, 3 years ago. So, you know, it was a good thing I really focused on getting my stuff together, because I had to step in, and, you know, now I'm full time, right? So, which honestly is a huge blessing. Like, it's been the time of my life. So I'm so happy. I mean, not the circumstances, of course, but I'm really happy to have him around all the time. So.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, like this pressure to be facing as a young person. I mean, obviously, like, you know, I see your face light up when you talk about your son, and it sounds like it's been an amazing experience, and obviously this led to a lot of positive change in your life, which is incredible, and but it doesn't take away from the fact that was a lot to handle all at once. All of that commuting to just to be able to see him, you know, your determination to finish your education, and now this new focus, I guess we can call it, on providing a better life for him, and kind of having him in the back of your mind, I'm sure, as you're making all of these decisions. Like, that is a lot of change to go through as a 22-year-old.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount. It's a lot of pressure. It's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure. But I guess I was used to pressure because I always had a lot of pressure on me because I was kind of identified as a smart kid since the time I was like 3 years old, for as long as I could remember. So the expectations for me were always super high. And in some ways, those expectations and the weight of them might have contributed to, my slip ups with, the shoplifting and that kind of stuff, because I was kind of really tired of being the golden child and everybody's mascot and everyone's trophy that they would kind of roll out on stage anytime they want to show off their institution or their class or their group or whatever it was. I didn't feel like I was being seen as the person that I am. I felt like I was being seen as my accomplishments, or my ability to essentially synthesize and break down and translate information pretty quickly. Like, what does that really mean in the long run if you don't do anything with it? Like, what is smart in a vacuum? It's nothing. It's what you do with it, right? But anyways, there were like these huge parts of me that were not being seen. The parts of me that were an artist. I mean, from grade 1 to grade 6, pretty much every day I was drawing at least like one picture. I was spending probably an hour each day just like drawing all the time. I wouldn't say I was like a tremendous artist, but I was pretty good for a kid. I was doing it all the time. I was really into sports, and no one really ever like paid attention to my athletics. Like, no one was coming to my games or anything like that, or asked how like practice was or anything. Like, sometimes I don't even know if people even knew I had a schedule and I was doing all this stuff. All the focus was just on the academics all the time, and I started to resent that. I started to resent everything that came along with that, and um, I it wasn't so much that I couldn't handle the pressure, or I don't know, maybe it was. I'd like to think that that wasn't the issue, but it was more so that I wanted to create an identity for myself different from the one that was being heaped upon me from every angle, from every person. No one was seeing me. But anyway, I mean, all that, you know, pressure kind of had certain consequences, but it also got me in the frame of mind of being used to pressure, which I think helped me in a variety of different ways. It helped me in sports for sure. There are certain players they call clutch, and I've always kind of been one of those players that performs better in high pressure situations. But in the real world, as well, it helped me to really be able to know that though I am very stressed because of the pressure, that I need to center myself and block out the things that might be distractions, and put the big picture focus and goal in mind in front of me, and think about what activities will lead me toward that goal, and to essentially focus a lot of my activities, excuse me, most of my activities that are not like, when I'm relaxing or having fun, to focus most of my activities toward whatever that big picture goal is. And I mean, the number one big picture goal, more than anything, has been to make sure that my kid is okay. That's always been at the very forefront of everything since I learned that he was coming. Before he even emerged in the world, that my big picture immediately at that moment was, regardless of how hard it is, what the situation is. Sometimes I didn't want to give up. Sometimes I was tired. I didn't want to do things, but I kept going because I knew that he needed it and he deserved it.
And I wonder, as you're raising him and he's now a teenager, if you reflect at all on what was happening in your life when you were that age, because you also had to deal with some very tough situations when you were quite young. In one of your TED Talks called "An Uncommon Story of Hope and Redemption," you talk about your mother's mental health journey, and one of the stories you tell is about a time when the suicide prevention squad showed up at your door. And I believe you were in grade 9, I think, around 13 or 14 years old.
Yeah. I just finished grade 9. It was the summer between grade 9 and grade 10.
And what do you remember about that time?
You know what's interesting about that day, much less that time, that day, is I remember vividly what happened before the event and then what happened after. But what happened during the event is still, it's unclear in my mind. Um, it's one of those things I think they call them, I forget the term for them, but there's a term in psychology for, when that happens. Um, so essentially, me and my two older brothers, we're just such a big sports family. Like me and the guys, like we're just huge. It's like all we did. But anyway, we're watching the Euro Cup finals game. It was between France and Italy, and we're watching the game, and it's about halfway through the first half, a little bit, maybe a little bit more than halfway through the first half, and we get this knock on the door, and I'm the youngest, so my brothers, of course, they don't want to miss any part of the game. In soccer, there's no breaks in the game in soccer, right? So, so they sent me to the door to go answer it. So I open the door, and there are these two guys in these uniforms saying they're looking for, someone with my mom's name, right? I'm like, that's weird. Whatever. I'm just thinking about the game's going on. I'm missing it. That's like all that's in my head. So I'm like, all right, guys, come in, do what you gotta do. Anyways, I take them upstairs to where my mom was in her bedroom, and we open the door, and we find my mom just like in extreme distress. She's on the floor, and she's crying, and there's a bottle of pills like scattered around her, and it was very shocking for me because my mom's a very strong woman, like to this day, a very strong woman, and very stoic as well. And, someone who, when she walks into a room, there is a presence. Like, this is someone that carries strength with her countenance. So to see my mom that way, which I had never seen her before, and never even knowing that she had any kind of struggles of any sort, it was extremely shocking. It was devastating. There was a piece of me, I think, at that point that my perception of life and what the world is definitely changed that day. So all I know is my mom ended up at the hospital after that, and they gave her some antidepressants and they sent her home, and the doctors told me and my other brother who went to the hospital that things should be okay, and that was not the case. Things did not get better. They got a lot worse, and it took quite some time for my mom to get the proper treatment and then to start moving forward in a positive direction in her recovery. I mean, she's doing great now, so good for her, for all the work she's put into her own recovery. But at the time, I mean, though grade 9 was hard, because I think grade 9 is hard for a lot of kids, I think I was kind of figuring it out. I really feel like I was like, okay, I'm starting to get the hang of like that social life in high school. And I was really ready to go into grade 10 and just keep moving forward. But that was definitely a huge monkey wrench in my plans, and I just very quickly just transformed in terms of my outlook on the world. And I was already, I can't say I was like in a perfect mental state, because I was already starting to see some differences in terms of how I was behaving, up until age 11. Then 12, 13 I started to withdraw a little bit, but actually grade 9 I started to bounce back in a more positive direction, like I was saying. But once that happened with my mom, I definitely went just down, and it didn't help that a lot of the friends, most of them, if not all of them, I'd made in school in grade 9 dropped out of school, and so I was starting over from scratch there socially again, for like the third time in my life, even at such a young age. And My mom was also, experiencing these challenges that I did not understand, but I knew were impacting her in such a way that made me worry about things like, yo, how are we gonna put food on the table? Who's paying rent? How is rent getting paid? Is she going to still be able to work? Is she going to survive all this? Is she actually going to take her life? Every day in grade 10, every single day, I would leave school with a feeling of dread, not knowing what I was going to uh, open the door and walk into at home. I didn't know if she was going to be there or not. There were a few times where she wasn't, where I'd go home and, my brother would say it happened again, and he'd say that she's at the hospital, and it's, it was a wild year. I for things like field trips and any form that I had to fill out, I was forging signatures all the time because my mom just wasn't present. We didn't have any money, so I couldn't like go visit her at the hospital all the time because I couldn't afford the bus. Um, so it was really challenging, and it was, you know, thankfully I had, at least one brother there. One of my other brothers was, he was in school out of the city. But I had one brother at home who, I mean, he did his best as like a early 20s dude. But he certainly made sure I didn't starve, if anything. I wasn't eating great, but I wasn't starving either. But it was really challenging to deal with all that stuff at that time, So it certainly did have an impact on my mental health.
Oh, of course. I mean, to be so young and to be worrying about these very much, problems that most adults don't have to worry about, to have those concerns every time you went home from school. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And I'm sure as you kind of look at your son at this age and think about what you were going through, it must remind you of some of the things that were on your mind at that time. And I honestly, as you're telling me this, I think a lot of people, I don't know if they could have handled that. And you talk about this strength that you identified in your mother, in how she would walk into a room and kind of have this presence. And it was one of the first things I actually really noticed about you as I watched your TED Talk was, as soon as you walked onto the stage, those are two things just as you described your mother there, I would have described you. You had this strength and this presence where before you even started talking, I really wanted to know what you were going to say. And
Thank you. No one's ever said that to me before. So
really?
Yeah, seriously. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely felt that right away. And so it just hit me when you were talking about your mom that I thought, oh, that's kind of exactly how I felt when ahead of your talk. And you have shared this story about your family and the mental health journey that your mother went through with audiences around the world. This TED Talk has, I think, more than 1 million views from 2017, and it is really, I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to look it up and to listen to it. It's so powerful. But I wondered, how did you end up sharing your story for the first time?
That's a story. So the first time I shared my story, it was a time of my life where I was finally like coming out of the darkness, so to speak. And finding my footing in the world after. I mean, it almost seems like every few years I would have like these huge tragedies, just or like just changes in my life, things that would really impact my life in a way that would change everything. And I was like, it was always like one step forward, two steps back, it felt like. But finally I was kind of like emerging and like finding my footing. I was in a really good relationship at the time. I was solidifying, a lot of my friendships, and that was cool. And my mom was doing better, and our relationship was improving. Because I mean, prior to my moving out, it was a little rocky at times. But I'd moved out, and her and I were getting along really well. And my oldest brother, who I wasn't like super tight with, even though he was like one of my huge support systems, we started to like build a much stronger friendship, and it just really felt like I was starting to figure it all out. Even my mental health was improved like dramatically, and probably for the first time in many years, I could say that I was not actively experiencing depression and being debilitated by anxiety. This was when I was around age 25. So things were changing just extremely, just drastically in my life in a positive way. And there had been so much negativity in the past that for me, I was like, I just want to leave all this stuff behind. I don't want to ever talk about this stuff ever again. That was a past, but I'm moving forward into a future that is, positive and brighter. But anyways, I was volunteering at a mental health agency in Toronto, and I said that like a foreigner. Toronto, that's how we say it. I was volunteering at this mental health agency, and I mean, most of the people in the office were, they were definitely they were adults, but it was myself and another young person volunteering there, and the agency had just developed this partnership with one of the school boards in Toronto. I said it again, in Toronto, to have this program called Stop the Stigma. And essentially, a huge part of this program was getting young people with mental health stories who have been able to emerge out of their, you know, dark times in a positive way. Excuse me, getting them on stage to tell their stories to teenagers who are still in high school. So, me and the other young person being the only young people in the office, I was a guy, she was a woman. It made sense for them to be able to package us together and put us on stage. So that's what they did. And it was, I didn't know how to say no to anybody at that. I didn't want to do it, to be honest. I was like, nah, internally, I'm like, I can't do this, man. I can't get up on stage in front of hundreds of teenagers. It's very intimidating. And tell my story. Yet, I couldn't say no. Not that I couldn't, I could have, but I didn't know how to say no. So next thing you know, I wrote this half an hour speech. A few months later, some practicing and revising, I get up on stage and I tell my story out loud for the first time. And it was really interesting because, one, I had never actually really told my story to anybody out loud except for the person I was dating at that time. So I never really told my story to anybody before. Two, I had never really actually done any public speaking of any sort before in my life. And I was also just really nervous. Like, I remember having, like, holding the script in my hands and, like, shaking, like, just, like, beads of sweat, like, dropping onto the paper to the point where I was having difficulty reading it. I was a mess. So, anyways, I'm going through my speech and I'm doing my thing, and then people start like laughing, and I notice they're not laughing at me; they're laughing with me, and I started to develop some momentum. I was like, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. And I just, I went through it and I got through it, and by the end of it, there was like huge applause, and I spoke right before the lunch break. So as soon as I was done speaking, I got off stage, so to speak, and like everyone just kind of rushed me. It was students, it was teachers, it was public health officials, other people who were there. There's like 30, 40 people who were just lining up to talk to me after that. To the extent that I didn't actually get any lunch because I spent the whole hour just talking to people, and they're saying, how long you been doing this for? How long you been speaking, telling your story? I'm like, oh, this is my first time like ever in my life. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh man, you're such a natural and you have a gift for this kind of thing. And mind you, in high school, everyone who knew me in high school would tell you that I barely said a word. I was very quiet. And then, I started to open up a little bit in my early 20s. But again, I wasn't like a super extroverted person. So I didn't know I had this ability to communicate. I thought I sucked at communicating, to be honest. I even had a, ex break up with me and said I was a terrible communicator. But all of that being said, here I was. And all of a sudden people are telling me that I'm good at this thing, and then that's kind of where it started. And I did a few more talks that year, and then what were I think 5 talks that year became 10 the next year, and then after that it just exploded to dozens dozens every year, and I've heavily lost count. I'm doing some sort of presentation, media or podcast or something nowadays, probably about three times a week. So it's been a lot. I'm very grateful for it. Of course, I've gotten a lot of practice over the years, so I've gotten better and I've reshaped some things. And at that time, I didn't have any of the poetry or the rap stuff in my presentation. It was just straight prose and speaking. But I incorporated some of that artistic stuff into it. And I mean, if you see, you can't really do it now because COVID. But before COVID, if you like, my stage show would always be a thing. I'd like come out to music, and it was I had fun with it. It was always great. The best part for me was just honestly getting to know the audience members after I do the talk. And sometimes young people come up to me and tell me their story for the first time. They've never told anybody else before. Parents, guidance counselors, therapists, they would tell me things that they had never told anybody before, and that was always my motivation to keep doing it. At the beginning, it felt great to do it because it was a lot of validation for me, and it's like, oh, everyone likes me. That's great. Let me get on stage and have people like me more. But after that went away, and I kind of didn't need that external validation anymore. It very much became, this story that I have is very important for a lot of young people. And what I really found was I would connect with, young men. I would connect with young women. I would connect with, young people who maybe were, not necessarily sure where they fit on the spectrum, that gender binary. I was connecting with them. I was connecting with, folks who are heterosexual, folks who are queer, folks who are black, folks who are white, and everything in between. It felt like I was able to connect with everybody. Teachers, principals, janitors, like I was connecting with everybody. So I said to myself that if I'm having this level of impact, I almost have a responsibility to be able to do something with this power that I have. I also grew up like watching cartoons, and in Spider-Man, they say with great power comes great responsibility. So I still try to live that and say I have a lot of things that maybe I didn't ask for, and things that I am not sure how they developed, but things that I can offer to the world in such a way that they can help people. So I'm going to try to do that.
It's very cool for me to hear about this first experience of you being on stage, because I've experienced, of course, your TED Talk, as I mentioned. I've seen you speak on several television segments, and to kind of imagine this young, nervous 25-year-old getting on stage. But the fact that you were so well received by high school students, I think, is a testament to what you had to offer. I mean,
it's the most difficult crowd.
Yeah, exactly. Like the toughest crowd. I feel like 95% of the time, I'm sure there is no response like that from high school kids, and you do have a very impactful story, and the way you tell it. I know you mentioned this, kind of people laughing along with you. You do inject a little bit of humor into your story as you were talking about, of course, some very serious topics. But I think it does really offer this very unique kind of entry point for people who maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable, in talking about mental health and suicide and all of these very heavy topics. But I was going to ask you, if it was kind of intentional to inject a little bit of humor into it, but it sounds like that sort of came a bit naturally, even in that first presentation.
Well, what's interesting about that is the first one, I would say that my delivery was not like, I was not delivering it to be humorous. I wrote all this stuff down, like this is actually what happened. So I'm just going to tell it to you. So my delivery was, very serious and like stoic, almost, right? Things like the first laugh I got when I was telling my story for the first time was when I started talking about watching Dr. Phil and like taking notes watching Dr. Phil. I didn't realize I was funny until people started laughing. Like for me, I was like, this is actually what I was doing. I'm like, I was trying to work it out and get better at life or whatever. I don't know. All those things, like all those funny parts of the story, literally all of them were written seriously when I first wrote them down. My dating mishaps, all that stuff was written like as serious, but it's a part of my story, so I want to tell it to you. I mean, of course, when I realized that people found this funny, I started to, play it up a little bit and, develop some comedic timing and stuff of that nature. But I didn't walk onto the stage as a funny person, I don't think. Not intentionally anyway. But, over the years, you get some practice and you start to realize like what's funny to people and what's not. And, you start to play around with it a little bit. And actually, I would say every funny part of outside of like, the Dr. Phil or the dating mishaps, but even some of the like ways I tell those stories, those things developed organically. So what I would do sometimes is I'd go on stage, and of course I have my script and I try to follow it, but I also improvise quite a lot when I'm on stage. And I would say everything that works in terms of being funny was a result of the audience giving me a particular energy and me running with it and realizing that works and continues to work with audiences. And then, I'd figure out different things work with different audiences. Some things work with like parents. Some things work with, adults who are just in general. Some things work with high school students. Some things work with young high school students. Some things work with, older high school students. Some things work with middle school students that, don't work with, and I mean, probably my favorite group of people to talk to are university kids, because I think that they've already been through high school, so they can look back on, all those funny and embarrassing moments and laugh at them too. And I also get to, I don't need to be PG-13 with that group, so I could be a little bit more real. But yeah, none of this stuff, like the humor stuff, I would say almost none of it was intentional, and a lot of it was improvised. And the things that worked, I just kind of kept them, and that's how they developed.
In your TED Talk, you also talk about your own mental health journey, of course. And I just kind of going back to the humor for a minute and the Dr. Phil moment, I also like laughed at that moment in your TED Talk, but also felt for myself that actually like I can totally relate to that, because that was the first time I heard about some of these concepts, like, I think you talk about self-talk and how you talk to yourself, and yeah, for whatever anyone thinks about Dr. Phil, it
Sure.
is a great entry point for a lot of people into mental health, into how we treat ourselves, and how the way we talk to ourselves actually can really impact the way we treat each other and the way we treat ourselves. So I also laughed at that part, but then it really did. I think that your humor has that kind of both sides to it, where it kind of makes you laugh, but then there is also this very poignant part to it too. But I did want to ask about talking about your own mental health journey, because in your early 20s, this was also when you really made a commitment to take care of your mental health. So tell me about that. And I believe this happened around the time your son was born. Is that right?
Yeah, it was in and around that time. I think it was maybe a few months before he was born. I don't know, but I think I talk about this in the TED Talk as well. I talk about this moment where I'm at my best friend's place, and his mom has a daycare that she runs out of her apartment, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching these kids run around and play, and it was almost like it was a flashback to who I was as a kid, because I was a very jovial, like hyperactive at sometimes kid, and I just saw these kids just really enjoying life, and I said to myself that that's what I've been missing for so long, and it made me remember what that feeling was like. And once I remembered it, I just knew I could not give up on getting that feeling back. And I really, really dedicated myself to getting better and doing whatever it took. I mean, I was obviously trying things before, but at that point, I was like, I have to do whatever it takes. And that's when I really started to open up to my mom about what I was going through. And then she supported me in finding help and doing better, and getting better and entering recovery. And that was kind of how that part of that was kind of the turning point in terms of me turning point going out there and getting some help and really sticking to it.
And what did that involve? Was it talking to a therapist, or tell me more?
I mean, eventually I had found a therapist. You know, I tried therapy, a couple times in high school, but I wasn't really with it because there was a lot of stigma, and the thing about like depression for me anyways, it's different for everybody, but for me it was a thing where I probably have a couple of good months every year, and then you get put on the wait list. They don't call you back for like sometimes like a year, and then I remember one time where they called me back where I was during one of my good points, and I was like, I've been doing great the past few weeks, the last month or so, so maybe I've turned the corner. Obviously, that wasn't the case, but things like that happen. But after going through that experience a few times, you realize that just because you're okay for like a few weeks or a month does not necessarily mean that you're ready to walk this path on your own without the professional support. So I really dedicated myself to it. I went to my school and tried to find support there, but the wait lists were incredibly long, and I was looking in different places, and my mom was like, why don't you talk to our family doctor about it? And we, like, as a family, we were really tight with him, so he cared about me a lot, and he set me up with a referral for the therapist that ended up being someone who really changed my life.
Wow, I mean that to be make that commitment at a young age to do, to try and figure this out, and what you're saying too about the system and the wait lists, I think this is something I know we still grapple with today, and especially during this pandemic. I think people are in there's more need, of course, for mental health support, and it seems the wait lists are even longer these days. And that makes me think about your the Reach Out Response Network, which you co-founded. So some of these things that happened to you earlier in your life, is that part of did that contribute to you founding this network and realizing there was a need for something more that when it came to mental health support?
100%. I've been working in mental health for a long time too, so that has certainly influenced uh, my has certainly given me motivation to want to have a mobile crisis response service that's not police, and something that's also really effective in helping people to get support that they need. But I would say that my lived experience, personally, and as someone who has family members who have struggled, that played a huge part in me wanting something like this to happen, because there were times where either personally as a professional, police would show up, and they just clearly are not equipped to handle the situation and to really support people. Sometimes there were times where the people were nice and they were trying their best and they just didn't have the tools, and there were other times where the people just weren't very nice. Probably more of those than the nice people. Um, and at the same time too, when you're a black person, or maybe another equity deserving represents another equity deserving group, you don't always feel comfortable calling police to your home, whether that's personally because there might be the potential of threat or escalation, but also I lived in a community where, like, when police are showing up to your house, that meant something, and it usually meant something negative, and it could put a target on your back, either in terms of maybe you being ostracized from community, or in other ways that could actually lead to real potential for you being in danger somehow. So you don't want to call the police either for those reasons. So it's important that we think about these things, and we really think about how different people experience police officers, and also that um, you know many times in a lot of ways police officers have become the default catch-all response to any emergency that's not a fire or an immediate and an immediate health concern, a physical health concern. um, then it's like, okay, let's send the police, and now they have everything under their portfolio. So for us, we're thinking about mental health and mental distress and, crisis and things of that nature, and how we might be able to better respond to folks in that situation, not only to keep them safe from potential harm that does happen from time to time, but also to provide them an entry point or a first contact into a system that can help them not only get their mental health needs taken care of, but their other needs that might have contributed to being in distress in the first place. Things that might include food insecurity, or housing, or things of that nature.
You have been on such a journey with through whether it's your family's mental health as you were young, your own mental health, and now to see you at this point where you are really using your lived experiences to help other people. I mean, and it's incredible, really. And I know in your TED Talk is called An Uncommon Story of Redemption, and at the end of it you say, the first part of my story is common. There are a lot of young people who find themselves in that situation where they're dealing with mental health challenges and difficult situations with their parents, but the uncommon part is really what we're talking about now, and this kind of coming out of it, and being able to use your experience now to help other people. How does that feel for you now as you reflect back on some of those really challenging times, and to now be in this position where you're helping others?
It feels great. It feels really good. And it's when I got that big award, the 150 Difference Makers Award. I actually got that award like 2 or 3 weeks after I did the first TED Talk. So a lot was happening in my life at that time. And those moments were really validating for me, because what it said was that my life was not lived for nothing, and that I've been able to do something positive with my experience and my life and everything that that I had gone through. And the other piece too, I'm not sure what word to use to describe this, was I've always kind of walked around with a chip on my shoulder in terms of I wanted to prove all the haters wrong, and I still walk around with that chip on my shoulder, where I'm still I've done pretty well for myself, I think, but I still want to go beyond the potential of what people thought I would reach before those folks said I might have ruined my life because I had a kid at a young age. So, that's part of it. But the other huge part is, obviously, I want to help people as well. So, for me, it does feel good to be in this position. I would say that I've certainly started to sit within the reality of my life, which was challenging for me for many years. I didn't realize how well I had actually done, because the voice of 16-year-old me was still in my head, but sometimes it still is. I'm not gonna front everything's good all the time, but I'm doing a much better job of being able to look in the mirror and feeling proud of who I am and where I've come and what I've gone through, and to emerge on the other end of it in a positive way.
It's great to hear you say that, because I imagine with all of the highs and lows during that time, it would be hard to see the progress in a way if you have those that voice in your head, and when people say things to you like you're not going anywhere and you've ruined your life, you don't just forget about those things when they get better. But I'm glad you kind of brought this back to your turning point at this point, because it has been almost 13 years since that time, since you found out that you were going to have a baby, and so much has changed in that time, obviously, now. So what if you could go back now and talk to some of those people who kind of abandoned you, who told you these things you've ruined your life, what would you say to them now?
I'd say to them that you clearly didn't know who I was, and how much heart I have. There was a basketball coach I think it was Rudy Tomjanovich. Um, um, this is like super sports referencey. Everyone who knows me knows that I'm always talking, like making sports analogies. But anyways, one thing he said was never underestimate the heart of a champion. Um, and that's kind of how I live my life. When I look in the mirror, I mean, yeah, there are times where I struggle with self-esteem and confidence, and I have doubt and stuff like that. But at my foundation, and probably the biggest gift I got with all those people heaping, pressure on me since I was a kid, was this belief that no matter where I am, how bad it gets, that I can turn it around. And I think sports has really helped me with that as well. There's so many times in sports where you're playing a game and you're down a whole bunch of points and you just keep playing hard and then you come back and you win. So that's how I see my life. Is like, yeah, I was down 20 in the first quarter, but I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna prove it. And I think I've done that. So
Absolutely. I think you've definitely proven those people wrong, and you have helped so many people along the way by just by sharing your story. And I so look forward to seeing, what's next for you. Thank you so much for sharing your story today. I really look forward to having another conversation with you. I'm sure there will be many more turning points for you in the years to come.
thank you. I appreciate it, Priya.
Thanks so much, Asante. And thank you to all of you who are listening or watching today. I hope, I would love to hear what you thought about today's interview. I know I enjoyed it a lot. I learned so much, and I really do encourage you to watch Asante's TED Talk if you haven't seen it already. Please join us again next week as well for another episode of Turning Point. Until then, please take good care of yourselves and of each other.